today you will hear an incredible story. Our house, an ordinary 5-story building, was famous for the fact that it was mostly dominated by retirees. I was probably the only representative of the progressive youth in the whole building at the time. It just so happens I was 19 at the time, and I was expecting a summons any day now. So I wouldn't get bored. My father got me a job as an electrician. My story began when my neighbor across the hall gave his soul to God. Since he was a scandalous and fairly alcoholic, from which he eventually died his death, no one was greatly upset, and grandmothers, which he annoyed a lot, even gave a sigh of relief. A great niece and her husband moved into his empty apartment. Such an unremarkable middle-aged family. Uncle Kolya, as I called him then, was a tall, healthy man, a truck driver in his 40s. And she, well, I couldn't call her an aunt, a pretty young-looking, red-haired woman, about 33 or so. She was the only woman in our house that my gaze could linger on. And there was a lot to latch on to. I'll tell you, she had a very good figure. I used to stare at her, but that's understandable. I'm not yet 19. The most raging hormones here, any princess will seem. Besides, she was a very appetizing woman. Big blue eyes. Burly, fiery red hair, 5 feet 7 inches. And everything else, as they say, 90, 60, 90. Although I suspect that the upper 90 was much more than 90. She wore mostly short skirts, tight dresses, or slacks. Anyway, there was a lot to look at. What was I saying? Oh yes, the princess was often alone. It's understandable. Her husband is always on the road, a driver after all. But there was nothing wrong with her. In the absence of her husband, no one came to her, and she did not go anywhere except for her work, and she worked as a teacher in a kindergarten. In principle, I did not have any relations with her. We just said hello if we saw each other. And then one day, when her husband was on another trip, her wiring shorted out in the apartment. It was like the law of meanness on a Friday night. Actually, there was no use calling a handyman. But when she turned to me about it in the evening, I was not surprised. I went to the door across the street. I spent about 2 hours in the kitchen, while my neighbor was rattling the dishes, and I heard the delicious smells. Then, when I was almost done, my neighbor, coming out of the kitchen, asked, "Are you going to have dinner?" The kitchen smelled really good, and I couldn't say no. It began otherwise in the young man's house, and I did not even know the name. It's not good somehow, Vadim. I introduced myself, Irina answered, and added, "Nice to meet you," I answered, and gently shook her hand. He chatted with her until midnight. I did not even notice how the time flew by. When I got home after midnight, my father looked at me and said with a smile, "Well, did you fix it?" He had a sly look in his eyes. Yes, there was a short circuit. It took a lot of work, but I did it. My father grinned and added, "Watch out or Kolka will short-circuit it for you." He laughed. I had no idea. "Father," I said, realizing he was joking. And from then on, I often went to visit them, both when the owner was at home and without him. As a neighbor, I helped Irina when she needed something while the host was away. We even became friends with her husband. One day, Irina called me to nail a hanger. I nailed it, and she again sat me at the table. Well, she liked to treat me. I had a cup of tea with rich pastry rolls, and I had the nerve to ask, "And what is it, you still do not have children?" She suddenly got serious. I began to regret my question. "Yes, it does not work somehow." She blushed a little. Well, do not get upset. What are your years?" So almost half a year passed. The 6th unbearable on New Year's Eve. Or rather, on New Year's Eve, I was walking home after midnight. A thought occurred to me. Shouldn't I congratulate my neighbors, Nikolai and Irina? I rang their doorbell. "Who?" I heard through the door Irina's voice. "Iris, Happy New Year!" I almost shouted. I was in high spirits after the champagne and not only drunk at the New Year's Eve party. "Oh, is that you, Vadim?" She went to bed already. She was already in her robe. "Excuse me! That's why aren't you celebrating?"
As dear Todors, I'm not having any fun by myself.
"But why by yourself? And where is Uncle Kolya?"
They called him in. His partner got drunk, so they pushed him out on New Year's Eve to go to another city. She looked upset.
"Oh, can I then come to you?"
Ultimately check with my husband.
Just a moment, let me in the house with the words. Why not? At least I will not spend part of the holiday alone. I came in. We were seated at the table. We drank, as usual, champagne for the new year, wished each other all the best. Apparently, the alcohol went to her head a little. She suddenly became sad and complained that it was not the first holiday she was celebrating alone. "You know," she said, "I wish I had kids. It would be more fun. At least there would be someone to decorate the Christmas tree, gifts to put under the tree." Her eyes sparkled. Well, here we go, I thought. Here comes the tears. So to shake her up, I asked her, "Why don't you have a baby?" She looked at me sadly. Then she said, "As a child, my Nicholas had a serious infectious disease. The disease passed, seemingly without complications, but as it turned out later, a complication was still. He could not have children. It became clear after we were married, when after a year and a half of living together, I was not able to get pregnant, and I started visiting doctors. At first, I suspected myself. I had an abortion when I was young. I thought it was because of him that I did not have children. Turns out I had nothing to do with it. There's nothing wrong with me." And then he remembered his disease, and the doctor said it was probably the cause of infertility. "Well, what about medicine? Artificial insemination, it's not a problem now, is it?" Said I. "Yes, that's true. And we learned only it is expensive, and we do not have such money yet. That is why my husband is taking any job. He wants to save money. He got the apartment from his uncle, may he rest in peace." I, after a little silence, began, "Well, in another way, somehow, there were no thoughts." I made a meaningful face. "How's that?" She looked at me suspiciously. "Having imprelix." "Well, so are some. Lections?" Suddenly, defiantly, said Irina. "And so, well, I heard from a distant relative, one who with her husband had similar problems. So, she went to visit her mother, and then 9 months after her return, they had a son." I looked at her meaningfully. "Ah," she laughed, "that's what you mean." I knew what I was thinking, but it was complicated. "What's complicated about it?" I got a little bolder. I love my husband, and there is no candidate for the role of a surrogate father. She squinted mischievously. It's not a problem for a woman like you, is it? What beautiful, slender, sexy. I was even a little embarrassed. Yeah, from another man. I don't want to, and I don't have a lover. She smiled, and suddenly she smiled mischievously. Would you dare? She blurted out. I thought I heard you. Are you kidding? Yes, no, I'm serious. I could see in her eyes that she wasn't joking. Of course she wasn't. I finally came to my senses. What about Uncle Collier? You won't tell him. I saw mischievous sparks in her eyes. And then I didn't get home until morning. My father, not having slept and tired, decided that I had spent the night with my friends, and after scolding me a little, sent me to bed. And after proper time, Irina gave birth to a son. Our secret remained with us. Nicholas was sincerely happy about it. Perhaps he suspected or guessed something, but he never said anything to me. 18 years have passed. Irina and Nicholas still live next door to each other. Until I exterior each. I grew up and married a schoolmate, and everything would have been fine. Except that my wife often hints at me, the boy next door, it's too much like you, becoming. So far, I'm doing my best to make jokes. Dear listeners, please like and subscribe to our channel. It stimulates me to release new videos for you.